my friends, and I don't eat my friends. So said George Bernard Shaw, a well-known Irish playwright and writer, and a well-known vegetarian and campaigner for vegetarianism who lived between 1856 and 1950. Hi, I'm Dr. Charles Byrne. I'm a psychiatrist with a special interest in diets that protect the heart and can prevent heart disease and even reduce it. And the great thing is that these diets also help protect the planet and from climate change.
And hi, I'm Sinead. I am a student of public health and I have a keen interest in protecting the planet from climate change as well as diets that can help reduce heart disease, which is what we talk about. So this week we are continuing the story and the research of the two doctors who pioneered plant-based, low-fat diets to prevent and reverse heart disease. We heard in a previous episode they both influenced President Bill Clinton and helped him to overcome serious heart problems.
And in this episode, Sinead, we're not going to discuss in great detail all of the recommendations and dietary options that we spoke about, particularly in the first three episodes, based on the work of Dr. Ornish and Dr. Esselstyn.
Yeah.
So please, if you'd like to hear again our general recommendations and the 4 dietary options we're recommending, please listen to those first 3 episodes. But I would like to emphasize at the start that if you're suffering from a heart or cardiovascular condition or you have any medical disorder, please consult with your doctor and discuss it with them.
Very important.
Yeah, before embarking on any of the dietary recommendations or exercise regimes that we've recommended. And also, if you're on any medications for these conditions, please don't stop or reduce them without first talking to your doctor because, heart conditions are very serious disorders and the treatments are necessary. However, if you make progress with the dietary options that we've described combined with exercise and you're able to get your cholesterol level down or lose weight, it may be possible in consultation with your doctor to have your medications reduced. And if your problems are milder, like you just have raised cholesterol or you're a bit overweight or slightly high blood pressure, the diets that we're recommending combined with exercise may be all that you need. And if you've got none of these problems, hopefully they will prevent them from ever happening.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, what is good for your health is also good for the planet. So me and Charles are both in an organisation called Irish Doctors for the Environment, and we are passionate about protecting the planet, as we said, protecting the planet and combating climate change. So animal agriculture alone causes 20% of greenhouse gases globally, and that's more than the entire transport sector produces. So if you reduce your meat consumption, go vegetarian, you're also doing something very significant for the planet. So it's a win-win.
That's right.
Yeah. So last week, we were talking about the work of Dr. Dean Ornish and how his study proved that eating a plant-based diet with only 10% of calories coming from fats or oils and combined with the stress reduction, the group support, we were saying about how 82% of those patients were able to reverse their heart disease to a degree. So this week, we're going to discuss the amount of fats that can be consumed daily to bring about that change. Also, how you can keep your fat consumption at the 20% or less of daily calorie to prevent cardiovascular disease for developing and perhaps prevent it worsening if you already have it. So Charles, can you tell me what else you found about Dr. Ornish's work following your own heart episode?
Yes, Sinead. So as we mentioned in the last episode, there was this research that he did initially where, and it was published in The Lancet, where, as you mentioned, 82% of the patients who were able to keep their fat consumption at 10% of their daily calorie intake and who fully took part in the other parts of his program, exercise, a group therapy, meditation, they were able to reverse it. But also they significantly lowered their cholesterol levels and they lost weight. In fact, on average, in the patients in his group lost 24 pounds over the course of a year.
Yeah.
But actually, Dr. Ornish then continued that study using the same group of patients, and he asked them if they'd be willing to do it for another 4 years.
So 5 years altogether.
5 years altogether, and most of them agreed.
Yeah.
And that's important because it was argued for a long time that these keeping fat consumption that low, you could do it maybe in the controlled setting of a hotel or a condominium rated as rigorous, but living out in the community, could you really keep it up? So this 5-year study was a real test to see if it would work.
Yeah.
So he got this 5-year study published in the prestigious Journal of the American Medical Association in 1998, and he wanted to see how much further, over a longer period of time, the improvements could happen. And as we said, could they sustain it living in the community? And so, as with the other study, there was, they called the experimental group, which was the group following his dietary and other recommendations. And there was a control group, which was their treatment as usual, more or less. They followed the advice of their cardiologist and their doctor. And they made more moderate changes. They kept, for instance, the fat consumption was supposed to be around 30%, but in fact it was probably more than that. So
that's in the control group then that they were comparing to Dr. Dean Ornish's experimental group.
Yes.
So in the control group, you said that it was around 30% that they were of their calorie intake was fat.
But it wasn't monitored as precisely as Dr. Ornish's group, who very strictly kept their consumption down to 10%.
10%, okay.
So at the end of 5 years, they restudied, they did studies in the coronary arteries, and the experimental group, following his recommendations, after 1 year, their coronary blockages were reduced by 4.5%. But by the end of 5 years, they were actually reduced by 7.9%.
That's crazy, isn't it?
The coronary arteries had opened up that much more over 5 years. And as a result, the blood flow to the heart muscle increased in those patients. But in contrast, the control group, the narrowing of the coronary arteries actually worsened by 5.4%. And by 5 years, it had worsened to a massive 27.7% occlusion.
So if I'm correct, that was the control group. So they had, how much is that of a difference? Like that's about 20% of a difference between how narrow the arteries were in the control group versus the experimental
it's even
group.
more, Sinead, because the blockages became worse by 27%.
Oh,
in the control group.
yeah.
Whereas in the study group,
they got better.
The blockages lessened by almost 8%.
So that's like a 30% even more difference between the
so
the
it's very
occlusions.
significant. And, it just shows you how if it's not looked after, the coronary artery disease can worsen, the blockages can increase. So, and also in what we call the experimental group or the lifestyle change group, there were less than half the number of cardiac events compared to the control group during the 5-year period.
Mad.
So cardiac events included heart attack or myocardial infarction, deaths or cardiac hospitalizations, those kind of very serious sorts of events. So the study showed that the dietary and lifestyle changes could be successfully continued in the community and even over a long period of time, and it resulted in continued improvement in cardiac function and lessening of the blockages of the coronary arteries. So that was a real step forward. But I think one thing to consider when thinking about it, Dr. Ornish was saying is essentially saying that the fats and oils in our food are excessive in the modern diet.
Yeah.
And an essential feature of the dietary component of his regime was strictly limiting fat intake to a very low level compared to the average fat intake in the developed world. And as we've said, in his reversal diet, now we've put forward in the previous episodes 4 different dietary regimes, and 3 of them with a 20% restriction to 20% of your calories coming to fat. But the strictest of the options we put forward is similar to this one that Dr. Ornish used in his research, where fat intake is limited to 10% of daily calories. And if you compare that to the average American diet, which is very similar also to the European diet, 40 to 50% of calories come from fat.
So you're saying like in the modern diet that we are eating, like that most people are eating,
Yeah.
they're actually getting almost half of their calories from fat.
Yes. Believe
Wow.
it or not.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is the particularly heart-damaging fat called saturated fat. So, and an example of this is if you eat a burger and fries in a typical fast food restaurant, you easily get a demonstration of this because you normally eat this with your hands.
Yeah.
And the next time you do, look at your fingers, particularly after eating the French fries. They'll be covered with a thin layer of oil.
Yeah, it's always so gross. Yeah.
And also the oil or fat from the burger is usually soaked up by the bun. But if you look at the bun, you'll see the oil on it.
Yeah.
I don't recommend this because hopefully after listening to this podcast, you won't be eating that kind of food. But you can probably remember previous experiences. And also you'll have the same experience if you eat a bag of potato crisps or potato chips, as they're called in the US. If you look at your fingers, they'll have the same film of oil on them. So this is an illustration of how much our modern food is laced with fat. And in fact, if you are eating something and you see a layer of oil or film of oil on your fingers, it's probably a good indication you probably shouldn't be eating it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So sadly, it's everywhere in our modern foods, and we're increasing in increasing quantities. In fact, research has shown that the more affluent societies get, the more fat and junk and processed food that we tend to eat. And now, how do you know how much you're eating? Well, one way is it's in many countries, it's required that the amount of fat and saturated fat is stated on the packaging of food. Together with other food groups, for example, sugars.
Okay.
And it's normally expressed in grams per 100 grams of food.
Yeah.
So when you start looking at the food packaging, you'll be amazed at how much fat is contained in food. So I was spending a lot of time in the supermarket squinting at these.
Need to
levels.
bring your glasses to the supermarket, yeah.
To see how much is in each one before I buy it.
Yeah.
There's also a particularly dangerous kind of fat called trans fats. Now, thankfully, they're not used so much, but the more solid kind of margarines, they put trans fats in things to make them have a very long shelf life. They last a long time.
Yeah.
But they're particularly damaging for the heart and causing atherosclerosis.
I think that kind of makes sense because, like, if something has a long shelf life, now there are things with long shelf life, like chickpeas that are fine, for example.
Yes, yeah.
But if something has an artificially long shelf life, it makes sense that it's bad for you.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
Because, like, those things are going to last longer. If they last longer outside the body, they're going to last longer inside the body.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense to me.
It's an example of how food can be processed in a way that makes it harmful. Not intentionally, but that's the effect that it has. So Dr. Ornish, in his book, which we mentioned before, Dr. Dean Ornish's program for reversing heart disease, describes the contrast between the typical American diet and his reversal 10% diet. And sadly, European diet is very similar to the American diet in terms of fat content. So to quote from him in his book, the typical American diet, it consists of, as we said, 40 to 50% fats, a lot of which is the saturated fat. This is as a percentage of daily calorie intake. It's 40 to 50% fat, with saturated fats being a lot of it. It's 25 to 35% carbohydrate. It's 25% protein, and has a massive 400 to 500 milligrams of cholesterol per day.
It's a lot.
That's your typical diet.
Okay.
And in contrast, the reversal diet, which the patients are on in that study, consists of 10% of calories come from fat, and it's more so healthier fats called polyunsaturated or monounsaturated. It's a lot more carbohydrate, but 70 to 75% carbohydrate. It's 15 to 20% protein, and it compared to the 400 to 500 milligrams, it has only 5 milligrams of cholesterol per day.
Okay, so just before we get into, we're going to talk about how you can calculate your fat intake per, like your overall fats compared to your calorie intake and how to make that healthy. But just before we get into that, we're going to take a small little break here, guys. So if you want to have a cup of tea or a healthy snack, and you can, after this, you'll know how much fat is in it per your calories. So we're going to take a small break and we'll be back to you with that in a minute.
If you find what we've been talking about interesting, you can find a lot more information on these topics in my book called Save Your Heart, Lose Weight and Help Save the Planet, which is available on Amazon.
So before the break, we were talking about a typical American or European modern diet. So just to say about that, you were saying to me earlier at lunch about the misconception about carbohydrates. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, you can broadly divide carbohydrates into two types: complex carbohydrates and simple carbohydrates. And the complex carbohydrates tend to be the more natural foods, like the whole grain bread, whole grain pasta, brown rice, but also the starchy vegetables that we mentioned before, like potatoes,
sweet potatoes, class.
Yeah, and turnips and peas. They're all complex carbohydrates. And there's a common misconception that they all tend to get lumped together. And there's a misconception that carbohydrate consumption is bad for you and the main cause of excess fat in our bodies. And people have the mistaken belief that restricting carbohydrates is the best way to lose fat. But in Dr. Ornish's book, in fact, he describes how hard it is for our body's metabolism to convert the complex carbohydrates, those ones we mentioned, whole grains, etc., into fat, whereas it's very easy for our bodies to convert dietary fat into body fat.
And that's why we want to reduce it.
Yes. And that's why also we want to stress complex carbohydrates rather than the simple carbohydrates.
Okay, yeah. Could you give an example of a simple carbohydrate?
So the simple carbohydrates are things like the sugars, also processed wheat like white bread, but also cakes and cookies, biscuits. They're all simple carbohydrates, and I'm going to be talking in a minute about how the metabolism of both and the absorption of both is different.
Okay.
But it's been shown scientifically that very little complex carbohydrates a person eats are actually converted into body fat.
Okay.
So, for example, if you have your plate a third full of mashed potatoes, or even a half full, you're actually eating a very healthy thing, as long as you don't put any milk or butter into the mashed potatoes when you make them.
Okay.
If instead you put just some vegan gravy on them, or if you have to have a little oil on them, you could use a very small amount of something like Flora Light, a teaspoon or so. But say with the vegan gravy, there's virtually no, there's very, very low levels of fat. So they'll fill you up, you'll feel good, they're delicious, and you can have them with your vegan burger or vegan sausages, and they're great, and they won't put on fat if eaten that way.
Okay.
So, and another thing people don't know about fat is that each gram of fat has over twice as many calories as each gram of carbohydrates.
Yeah.
So there are some food which are very popular where you're getting a double whammy.
No.
Because sugar is not good for you either. Sugar is obviously a simple carbohydrate. Fats, we are saying, are not good for your arteries. So double whammies are things like ice cream, which are a combination of high sugar and high fat content, chocolate, bars of chocolate, have a high fat level and high sugar level.
Yeah.
And they're very addictive.
Yeah.
And
I think we can all relate to that.
yeah. But they're a double whammy. That's why you have to, occasionally it's fine, but if you'd start taking them every day, you're going to run into trouble. And I say occasionally, everyone has slip-ups at times. So
we talked about this earlier, nobody's perfect.
No. And if you do, the thing to do is just the next day say I'm going to start again fresh today and I'm going to cut those out.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
So will we talk about the tables then? The tables that Dr. Dean Ornish has in his book.
Yeah. So these are tables. How do you? We're saying that for the dietary recommendations, 3 of them are preventive, which have a 20% fat limit, and 1 of them can actually reverse or reduce heart disease. Now,
with the 10%
limit.
Yeah.
But how do you practically measure if you're taking that amount of fat in? How can you limit it? And Dr. Ornish devised this ingenious way of doing that, of actually getting a figure of how many grams of fat you can take a day to stay within those limits.
Okay.
So now we can't show you on the podcast, we can't show you the figures, but I'll tell you how
Joys of being on a podcast.
And I can give you some ballpark figures, which will give you a very good idea, a kind of average figure that you have to stay in. So that he has it as a 2-step process. The first one is a table which is actually used by insurance companies called the Metropolitan, this American insurance company, Metropolitan Height and Weights tables. So from that table you can determine what your healthiest weight should be based on your height and your body frame. So you can calculate your ideal weight from this. For example, when I was younger, I was 5'10". I think I probably shrunk with age, but roughly.
Happens to all of us. We all start shrinking eventually.
For a long time. But so based on my height of 5'10" and my average kind of build, it's said that according to the weights, my weight should be between 151 and 163 pounds. So forgive me, anyone who's using kilograms and everything, but it's done in the American system. So that was a lot below what my weight was at the time, which was something like 204 pounds. So I had a long way to go. I had 40 pounds if I wanted to get to the ideal weight. But anyway, so I got that was the weight I was going for, and that he also said you can feel a weight that you'd feel comfortable going to. So if you just think what is your ideal weight that you'd like to get to, and you can use that figure, and so then with that ideal weight figure that you want to get to, he has a second table. And this one, you use your ideal weight, and also you have to decide whether you're inactive, moderately active, or very active. And from that, using your ideal weight, that you can get the number of grams of fat that you can take per day to keep within the limit. So according to his definition, inactive means your physical activity is limited to watching television, writing, sewing, a little walking, and so on. Moderately active means you spend approximately 10 to 20 minutes a day of continuous exercise at least 3 times a week, such as walking or jogging or doubles tennis, but not a lot of it. But active means that you spend over 20 minutes exercising continuously and vigorously at least 3 times a week. So that's more like singles tennis, running, rowing, basketball, or fast walking, brisk walking.
So just to recap, you've got your table 1, and that shows you your ideal weight.
Yeah.
You've your table 2, and that shows you whether you're inactive, moderately active, and active. And then is that enough to tell you what you're...
And then according to his table, you can see how much fat then you can take per day to stay within the 10% limit. So I'm going to give you ballpark figures.
Yeah, I was just about to ask.
So Okay, I did the calculations, and my ideal weight was 160,
Okay.
and looking at his table, my fat intake limit of total fat was 28 grams a day,
Okay.
and my saturated fat limit was 9 grams a day. So you get
Okay.
two measurements, and it also depends on whether you're male or female. There's different
Yeah.
measurements. So the ballpark figure, this is really the bottom line. For men in general, looking at his tables, if your ideal weight is between 150 and 165, you should be aiming to stay within 10% fat at taking between 25 and 28 grams of fat per day, and of which 8 to 9 grams can be saturated fat.
And then for women, if you want to stay within 130 to roughly 150 pounds around, you can have your total fat of 20 to 25 grams a day, and then saturated fat of 7 to 8 grams a day.
Yeah, and as we said before, a rule of thumb guide for saturated fat to total fat, it should be around a third or less. So you can see that both
Would it
of
be
those figures.
as little as possible, kind of?
Oh yeah, the less
Yeah.
saturated fat you can eat, the better. But in most foods, there is a combination of the healthier or total fat, and then there's a proportion of saturated fat. Which
I
we see.
actually have examples of those.
Okay. Oh, great. Good.
I looked at these earlier. If you want to see these, they're at the back of your book.
Yeah.
You have
Tables.
tables, and they show different
all of the
foods.
food groups alphabetically, and you can look up each food, and it tells you how much fat is in it and how much saturated fat is in it.
So I picked my two favourites, baked potatoes and chips. So let's see. In a baked potato, one kind of average baked potato, the total calories is 145 rather. So that would be total fat of 0.2 grams, guys. So baked potatoes are very good for you, actually.
Yeah.
And that's just plain baked potato. That's not with any trimmings or anything
Yeah.
like that.
And
then
saturated fat. How much saturated in
and then there
baked-
was no saturated
No
fat.
saturated
yeah, there
fat
was no
in
saturated
plain
fat
baked
in the
potato,
baked
yeah.
potato. But then I looked at chips. And I was sad when I looked at chips. So I looked at chips. So this is about a serving of 10 chips. And the calories were 114. But the total fat was 8 grams. And saturated fat in 10 chips was 2 grams. So I think I might avoid chips now.
Yeah.
I think
And
it's best to avoid them.
Yeah. It just shows you how you can turn something that's healthy into something unhealthy by the addition of fat. That, if you just eat your baked potato with, as we said, some vegan gravy or a tiny amount of vegan spread,
Yeah.
it's so much healthier than deep frying a baked potato, which gives it high fat, high saturated fat levels. Or if you cover it in butter, it has the same effect. So,
Yeah. It's about what you add to your food as well. Like,
Yeah.
because a lot of like the potatoes, sweet potatoes, all these whole grainy kind of foods are pretty good for you.
very good for you.
But once you start adding, it's
Yeah.
what's adding is the problem.
Yes,
Is what
yes.
I'm hearing.
And those foods won't put on weight. That's been scientifically shown.
Yeah.
The complex carbohydrates by themselves won't put on weight. But
Yeah.
if you eat fat, that goes straight into fat on your body.
Yeah.
And you can very easily put on weight with fat. The chips, how much fat was in those 10 chips? 5.
So it was 8 grams. It was 8 grams for 10 chips, 8 grams total fat for 10 chips.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if you're trying to keep your daily total fat down to 25 to 28 grams a day,
It's nearly
and
half.
10 chips
Yeah.
take up so much of that. So
Nearly half, yeah.
that's why you have to be very strict with the fats and oils. And if I can tell a kind of Irish joke,
Yeah.
the difference between the two diets, the preventive and the reversal diet that Dr. Ornish is saying. So with the preventive diet, how would you describe the difference? In that there's no fats at all. But in the reversal diet, there's no fats at all. But I mean, there is, you know what I'm saying, there is some fat that you have to be
but you
very
have to be
strict
very
with
strict
it.
with it,
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to take another break now. And when we come back, we have our recipe of the week. And this week, it is a delicious recipe for lentil soup. So Charles, tell us how to make this tasty lentil soup.
Yes, Sinead, this may not sound a substantial meal like some of our previous recipes or a substantial dish, but
It's very filling.
it's very filling.
Yeah.
It's an Indian dish, basically. It's spicy. It has a delicious blend of spices in it. And if you have it with some nice wholemeal bread, it could provide a good wholesome lunch with plenty of plant-based protein. Lentils are a great source of plant-based protein.
I love lentil soup.
Yeah, and it's also a good starter for a dinner.
I think you could have it as a dinner. I used to have it as a dinner on its own.
Yeah.
Because there's so much protein in it.
It's filling. It's lovely for a winter day as well. It's often on the menu of Indian restaurants where it's called dal soup. So the ingredients for lentil or dal soup are as follows. 2 cups of dry lentils, 1 vegetable stock cube, 1 can of tomatoes, 1/3 teaspoon of garam masala, 1 teaspoon of chopped ginger, 3 bay leaves, 1 teaspoon of turmeric powder, 1 small onion, 1 large potato, half a cup of fresh coriander leaves. And they really make a big difference, the coriander leaves. So we've been talking a lot about fats and fat content. The total fat for this dish for 4 people is only 3.8 grams. So that brings it down to record low total fat per person of only 0.95 grams.
Crazy.
Yeah, and it's delicious. So here's the method. It's quite simple, but it takes a while to simmer it. You put approximately 3 litres of water into a large saucepan, add the stock cube and bring it to the boil. Then you add the lentils, the chopped onions, the bay leaves, the chopped ginger, and a can of tomatoes. Then simmer it for 10 minutes and then add the potato, chopped into small pieces. Then you simmer it for a further 40 minutes. 5 minutes before the end of cooking, add the garam masala and then garnish it with fresh coriander and serve. And that's it.
Nice and simple this week.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, lentil soup is one of my favourites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with some wholemeal bread, it's a good lunch, I think.
Yeah, delicious. Like I used to cook it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I must. It's inspired me now. I must cook it again.
Yeah. And if you have a group of people, it's a great thing to share.
Yeah,
as well.
100%. Yeah.
So
thank you for that, Charles. And as always, we'll be putting our recipes up on social media. That is Your Heart, Our Planet on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. Also, please send us your comments on social media and we can read some out in future. Thank you to everyone who's listening and rating the podcast on Spotify.
Giving us 5 stars.
Giving us 5 stars. Thank
We'd
you.
like to give you 5 stars for doing it.
5-star listeners, yeah.
So that's right. And finally, if you find these topics interesting, you'll find much more detailed information on my book. My book has the tables that we've mentioned in Dr. Ornish's book. He gave me permission to reproduce them in my book. So you can calculate your daily fat, whether you're on a 20% preventive dietary option or the 10% reversal or reduction dietary option. You can calculate it from the tables in my book. My book is called Save Your Heart, Lose Weight and Help Save the Planet. And it's available on Amazon as a paperback and on Kindle.
And if I could just interject there, I think that if anybody's feeling intimidated by the prospect of a table, I think once you do it once, it makes it so much easier. And once you start reading the labels on things, it actually becomes a second nature, so just once you do it,
That's the 2 ways of doing it. That you can look at the labels of how much fat, etc., is in the food, or you can look it up in the appendix at the back of my book. Pretty much alphabetically, you can find out how much fat is
Very interesting read, actually.
a cupful of food, or a
Yeah.
potato, or so many grams. So those are the two methods you can calculate how much fat you're eating and stick within the guidelines, the number of grams you have from the table. And the tables are easy to read. It's just a matter of looking at your weight, your height, and your body frame and how much exercise, and follow along the line, and you easily get the figure of how many grams of fat you can have to stay within the limits.
Yeah.
So that's it for this week, and until next week, we look forward to being with you again next week. Bye till that time.
And a goodbye from me. See you again next week, guys.